So, greetings, friends. Today's Dhamma talk, the subject is paradox in the Dhamma, and really what I'm talking about within modern Buddhism. And it's often presented, the Dhamma is often presented as a paradox itself. And of course, an awakened human being never taught a paradoxical Dhamma. He taught a very clear and direct path to awakening, to gaining full human maturity. And this article was inspired, if I can use that word, by a quote from a recently deceased and internationally recognized Buddhist teacher, often called a master in his lineage. And again, I'm not disparaging him or any of the lineages, but just to point out that this is not something that the Buddha taught. These paradoxes have come about from the alterations and adaptations and accommodations that have been made to the original teachings of the Buddha to fit cultural views and charismatic individual views that have really led to a modern thicket of views, which is a phrase the Buddha used even during his time to describe the different competitive and contradictory so-called spiritual systems of his time. This was the quote, "Thus we arrive at a paradoxical truth of the Buddha way. The only possible free choice we can make is to choose to work for the freedom of all humankind, indeed of all sentient beings. Failure may be inevitable, but recognizing that is the first step in becoming free." So that sounds like a wonderful sentiment and beautifully altruistic. But look a little bit deeper, even at the last sentence, failure may be inevitable. He's implying that an awakened human being spent 45 years of his life teaching a Dhamma that has failure as the inevitable consequence of study. And of course, the Buddha never taught that you will, if you engage with his Dhamma, you will inevitably fail. And when that's looked at in the right context, that's even a hurtful statement, especially someone in a position of authority to state that here's something you should engage with, but understand that you'll inevitably fail. And then that leads back to the notion of the point of the Buddha's Dhamma is to save all sentient beings. Again, that sounds very altruistic. And of course, it's a wonderful idea to think that an individual could save all sentient beings. But the Buddha didn't even take that upon himself because he realized that it was an impossible task. He taught a path of recognizing all ignorant views so that one could awaken and gain full human maturity and realize the futility of saving all sentient beings. And that the ultimate reason is really beyond the scope of this talk. But the first the first noble truth that the Buddha taught is that as a consequence of having a human life, there will be suffering. There's no way around it. What we can do is to develop a profound understanding, which is what right view means. The Buddha described right view as having a profound understanding of suffering. He never said that there's an end of suffering except to stop this cycle of karmically driven birth and death and rebirth. Again, beyond the scope of this talk. As I'm saying that, this Saturday's talk from my center in Frenchtown is on karma and rebirth. The Buddha awakened to dependent origination, which simply states that from ignorance to 12 observable causative links, all manner of confusion, delusion, and ongoing suffering arises. So the Buddha taught a path to recognize and abandon ignorance. That's the essence of what the Buddha taught. Let me read a little bit more from this article. As pointed out by this teacher, the Bodhisattva Ideal is a significant paradoxical doctrine of modern Buddhism. This altruistic but confused and paradoxical notion states that this is the highest form of Buddhist practice, that meaning to delay individual awakening until all beings are awakened, or to seek awakening for the sole benefit of all sentient beings. This is often presented as an unattainable goal, as unawakened beings are endless. And Again, I took the Bodhisattva vow along with other vows in a Tibetan lineage. And at the time I thought that I was doing what was necessary. And it was in the lineage that I was a part of. If I wanted to continue my studies and be more of a part of that larger Sangha, I needed to take the Bodhisattva vow and some other vows. It wasn't until I realized the utter futility of that path, and also read the Buddha's words on what it means to be a bodhisattva, that I realized I was putting myself in this paradoxical soup that there was no way to get out of. Attempting to save all sentient beings, but with the realistic and achievable goal of individual awakening, engaging in the Dhamma begins to disentangle one from the difficulties and distraction of self-identity, reinforced by constant social interaction. So that's another aspect of this Bodhisattva vow that has now manifested to something called engaged Buddhism, where it's almost as if, here's my dog, he always has to take a drink when I do a broadcast. Much of modern Buddhism now has devolved into this idea that your Buddhist practice is engaged Buddhism, meaning you're always engaged in social causes. And even the idea that these social causes are so immediate now, and they weren't, is ignorance of what the Buddha taught in the life that he lived. The same exact problems that we have today are the same problems the Buddha addressed during his life, and they're addressed in the Four Noble Truths. His solution wasn't engaged Buddhism. His solution was an Eightfold Path to develop individual awakening so that at the individual level, we cease contributing to the suffering of the world. And that's the only thing that we really have control over. And the Buddha transformed his whole area of northern India during his lifetime. He brought an end to a lot of the violence, a lot of the inequities common during his time. As Buddhism spread out of northern India and continued to spread around the world, his message changed, his teachings changed, and they have been accommodated and become quite paradoxical to the point where the idea of the Bodhisattva has become more important than individual awakening. And even some of the more modern teachers say, well, there's two paths to Buddhism. Well, there's hundreds of different paths if you want to look at all the different contradictions in Buddhism. But the Buddha only taught one path. He taught the path of arahantship, of individual responsibility and individual awakening. The Buddha often called himself an unawakened bodhisattva. When he said that, he said, as an unawakened bodhisattva, I had the thought that renunciation and seclusion is good. But being an unawakened bodhisattva, my heart did not leap at renunciation. What does he mean by an unawakened bodhisattva? Well, a bodhisattva is a human being who has great compassion for all sentient beings. But being unawakened, they lack the wisdom in knowing how to address the problem of suffering for all sentient beings. That's what the Buddha means when he's saying unawakened. In his sutta on the Nagara Sutta, Nagara, he describes the process very clearly of being stuck in this feedback loop of self-referential views, but also having that great compassion. And upon his awakening, the Buddha describes it as he looked out on the world and he saw the world was aflame. But it was only at that point that he knew an effective way of dealing with the afflictions of the world. The Buddha's words, I continue, I did not grow confident or steadfast in the Dhamma. I did not see renunciation bringing peace. Then the thought occurred to me that I have yet to understand the drawback of self-indulgence through sensual pleasures. So even that idea, it's a little bit subtle to see at first, that I can save all sentient beings, or that my life should be about saving all sentient beings prior to developing the Buddha's Dhamma, is completely self-indulgent. And it's such an altruistic distraction to think that now I'm living my life, my Buddhist practice is about saving all sentient beings but that notion is rooted in self-indulgence. I'm doing this. The Buddha never saw himself as a savior or his teachings as salvific in any way. He simply taught an eightfold path for individuals to take to it, develop it, awaken, and then they can minister to the world if that's what they choose. But they'll do so from a point of view of great wisdom, rather than this self-indulgent view that I can save all sentient beings, or even that it's possible. Again, the idea that all sentient beings can somehow be saved ignores the first noble truth. And again, explaining that completely is beyond the scope of this talk. The Buddha continues. Then the thought occurred to me, if having understood the drawback of sensual pleasures leading to distraction and suffering, meaning develop a right view, I pursued the path, my heart would leap at renunciation, and I would develop freedom, release, and lasting peace and happiness. The Buddha spoke of being a bodhisattva prior to his awakening and described the confused and paradoxical quality of a mind of an unawakened bodhisattva. He certainly did not delay his awakening until all sentient beings awakened. If he did, we'd still be waiting for the Buddha to awaken, wouldn't we? We wouldn't have his direct teachings as preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. He never presented himself as a savior. He awakened through his own efforts and through his own inquiry into impermanence, not self, and dukkha. He did not teach a salvific religion. He taught an eightfold path that any human being could engage with and become rightly self-awakened as he awakened. And again, in the Nagara Sutta, he teaches in that sutta how he came to an understanding of the Eightfold Path, because the Eightfold Path addressed all of the ignorant qualities of his mind that were holding him back and blocking himself from awakening. These are my words now, an awakened human being is of far more benefit to all humanity than an unawakened bodhisattva, as the Buddha's own awakening shows. The Eightfold Path does not begin by recognizing the futility of saving all sentient beings or any other confused or paradoxical teaching. The Eightfold Path presents the real possibility, to awaken by taking responsibility for what one is responsible for and can realistically achieve. Again, the Buddha didn't, and he said this repeatedly, if I don't teach anything that is not achievable. He taught an eightfold path that any human being could take to and develop on their own, provided that they maintain the framework of the Eightfold Path. Again, I think that's the end of the, there's more to the article if you want to continue to read it online, called Paradox and the Dhamma. The most remarkable thing in my lifetime is that the original teachings of the Buddha are still available in their pure form. Even the story of how they've been maintained is remarkable, and that's on my website, the story of the Pali Canon. It's the most remarkable achievement, and I'm so fortunate, we are also fortunate that these teachings are still available, because they are so simple and direct that anybody who takes to them wholeheartedly can develop awakening as the Buddha described awakening. And he described that in very non-mystical, non-esoteric terms. He described the quality of mind of an awakened human being as calm, and that quality is developed from becoming released from clinging to wrong views. And that's really the sole reason why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. And it's really the sole reason why the Eightfold Path is the only path that develops that type of quality of mind, an unawakened, human being, a fully mature human being, an arahant, rather than continually and endlessly chasing the ideology of and the paradox of the bodhisattva. So that's today's talk. Thank you for joining, and I hope to see you again next week. Peace.